Well, the playoffs have been decided. We know where everyone's playing and who everyone's playing. Look at each of those games that will happen starting in this week. This is Sports Hour. All right, it is the playoff wildcard round one. On some interesting games happened as last week. If you know, we're not going to review them off the bases, but we do know who actually made the playoffs going into this week. I'm going to put it down here. You look at the playoffs right now. These are the teams that made the playoffs. The Panthers got in the game the second seed. They weren't able to. They won, and they had the second best defense in the league and the first best offense. They have had the first best offense all year long, so that's not surprising at all. So, not at all surprised about those. The Browns had already clinched them. I think we already decided most of them. I think the only ones that were being decided were the other wild card slots. The Giants are going to be have made the playoffs. They are going to be the 8th seed. The Pirates also made the playoffs. They are the 7th seed, which is kind of unfortunate for any team that's facing off against the Panthers, because Panthers are very good when it goes to the wild card. It's hard to really say what's going to happen for all these teams. This is the exact filings, and this will be how the draft will be decided as well. Combination between both of these as well. These are the teams that are also eliminating their final records. Don't really need all these eliminations, but anyways, on the other side, the Leland Cats are already clinched. The Packers clinch their division. First time they made the playoffs. They won this last week, and the Otters didn't win. So that gives you a safe position. The Chargers and Supermen are both making the playoffs, and the Techs snuck their way into the playoffs of the 8th seed. So these are all the games that happen. These are all the games that happen. Now the games last week were all pretty normal. This is how everything worked out. It pretty much is one side. Right for that portion. So the update here is that I did finish off on top. We are going to be looking to look at any predictions for the actual playoff predictions after going on to the seasons, but it will come down to this. It might not happen. It won't happen until probably next week, and all of the things that have happened prior to the season or before the actual. This is the only one we're going to be looking at pretty much from now on. We're not going to look at the power rankings after this for you guys to just do more of this. I did already update the power rankings for this, so we have a little bit of difference. But basically, I went 18-2. Only 2 I got wrong. They got wrong too. So I bet all the ones that, but I got most of them right. So the only one they got one, I got UNC wrong. They got right of those, but they got 5 wrong, and I got yes, yes. And these are all predictions for me. So I ended up finishing off the season, right, which means we've had a total of 1,347 correct predictions, and we've had 573 incorrect predictions. That all being said, it was a pretty interesting season. We now get to move to the actual playoffs and who will make it, who is playing who in the playoffs. It will start off with at MBL Stadium. We don't know the actual times of each one of these games yet. They'll be introduced. No, we will know pretty soon here about what the times are. The games will happen at each one of these stadiums. They'll happen at different times. But NBL Stadium will be the Indians and the Giants, which is the first. There's all the seats here if you want to go look at these. And here's the records along with them. Panthers. The Indians are going to face the Giants. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be a pretty tough game. Indians are favored by 32, and their first game will happen on Saturday. It is on 6/1. The first regular games are going to be 6/1, 6/2, 6/3, and those are going to be all of those happening. Then there's going to be a skipped day. So they will play they'll play again on 6/5, and then 6/6 will be the last game if needed. The time, that's what's going to happen for each of those positions. The times are going to be will be decided pretty soon here, but we'll know about those games. The Panthers will have to face the Pirates. The Pirates are going to be. It's going to be interesting for the Panthers and Pirates because they are actually in interesting combinations. They're not great, but they're not the worst team position wise. However, the Panthers are probably going to absolutely demolish them, and we will do a little bit of protections for each one of these teams. We got the Tigers and the Knights. We've got the Browns and the Dogs for the MBL North. And the times will be decided being tomorrow now. So that first time will be at 11 o'clock on 6/1. Panthers game will happen at 1:30. Nope. It's basically the same times, right? Just want to confirm this. Yeah. The first game for the Panthers will happen at 1 o'clock. Then the first game for the Tigers will happen at 3 o'clock. And the first game happens for this one will be at 5 o'clock. No. Sorry. I messed up there. The first game will happen at 10 o'clock here. Panthers game will happen at 12. That will give the Panthers at 2 o'clock. And that means the last game will happen at 4. There's 2 hours between each of these games. And it's for that one. On the other side, it will be 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock. And 4 o'clock as well. No, not what? It is different for that game. It's going to be 4:30 for that game. So that game will go, it's 5 o'clock for that game. And these will be happening. They are making sure we have the teams correct. Now they're moving everything forward, right? Yes, they're moving everything forward for that game. Their games will happen at the same time as those games occur. Nope. Give me a second. They don't happen at the same time, right? Because they can't. Okay, so the Fairchild Stadium is the first will happen, which is at 10 o'clock. I'm getting confirmation now. Then the NBL Stadium will happen at 12:30. At Louves Stadium, which is the first game's at 2 o'clock there, that game will occur at 2 o'clock, right? No? No, so that game's going to happen at 12. Right? You guys give me conflicting information. Baker. Baker Stadium's first game will be 12. That game will occur at 2 o'clock. And then Packers and Leland Stadium will occur at 9 o'clock. It's a little bit earlier than. Not 9 o'clock. That game will happen at 4 o'clock as well. So Fairchild Stadium is at 4 o'clock. And then it's 10 o'clock. So you don't want to play the games at the same time. At NBL Stadium, that is going to be a 10 o'clock at 12:30 game. Louisville Stadium is going to be happening at 4:30. It's a little bit of a later time. And then we have the Baker Stadium is normally at 12. That game will happen at 3. So these games are all going to be at weird times. And that's not necessarily what they're going to all be in every one of the stadiums. That's probably going to be at, but we don't know for sure on that. I hope they have the right times for that, because I don't know. So those are the games, those are the times that happen. So I'm going to talk about each one of these games individually. And I apologize for the times we had a little bit of communications that went crazy. There will be 2 games that are happening simultaneously every time, very much. 6-1 is the first game, which is 2 days from now, so that's only on Saturday. Alright, so talking about each one of these games, we have the first seed facing the 8th seed. Now let's see if I have the... If you look here, the Indians... Here, let's see. To talk about the Indians have done actually really well going into this year, and they have actually done better than any other teams than the Indians. The thing is, the Indians should not have been nearly as good as they actually were. Indians were supposed to actually be really bad. 3-13 is what I had them as predicted record. Clearly, they were a whole lot better than that. So, looking at a position for this one, I think honestly they should have been a whole lot worse than they actually were. But they end up being one of the better teams in this league. I had them predicted to go last, going 1-7. They went undefeated, which is something that most teams do not do ever in their series. That's not going to be it. Is this one a good one? That's not it either. I need to restart doing stuff. Let's see here. I must have forgotten how to deal with this. Looking for the records. And I don't see it. Give me a second. So looking at this right now for the Indians, we have looked at the team that we had, the Indians. Indians have done absolutely new, and I haven't updated this last season's because we have to actually determine everything out first. But if we look at the Indians 31 wins and 3 ties prior to this season. 16 wins will put them at 31 plus 16. We'll put them at, it's divided by how many? Be 31 plus 16 plus 1.5. So they'll have 47 wins after this season. And they're one of the teams that have been there for a long time. They've made the playoffs once prior to this, and it's been a tough year for them. They started in 2008, and this will be the second time they've been to the playoffs. This is a tough team if you look at their schedule, they were not supposed to be good. In fact, they were supposed to actually only have 3 wins, which would have put them only at 34 wins. Versus the other side, we have the team they're going to be facing off against, the Giants. They were not supposed to be much better. They were supposed to be actually basically exactly what they got. They ended up being 6-10. They ended up getting an 8-7-1. So technically, they got 1 game more than they were supposed to. But unfortunately, it doesn't mean much. They were supposed to miss the playoffs. They barely made it into the playoffs at this time. So, but they did do well enough to make it into the playoffs at this point in time. If we looked at the division, I'm going to go here. If you look at the divisional matchup, the Indians are actually the best defense overall, and they have a pretty good offense. On the other side, if you look at the Giants, they are good. They have a good offense, but they don't really have a good defense. And I think honestly, this is going to be a pretty sad game for those 2 teams. The Giants, on the other hand, for the context, to compare their playoff appearances, Giants only have a few more wins, but they don't have any ties. Grant, the Giants also did start in 2022, so they haven't played nearly as many games. Well, they've only made the playoffs 1 time since then. They've made the playoffs recently. They started in 2012, but they haven't played nearly as many games. In my opinion, this is going to be a very interesting matchup between these 2 teams. I just don't see it being one of those teams. My prediction, and I'm going to go and give my predictions here. I do think it's going to be the Indians. And a 3-0 sweep. I think it's going to be 3-0 to make it to the next round. I don't think the Giants are going to have enough to be able to come back. We've got the Panthers facing off against the Pirates. Pirates are just not a team that's going to be great either. They're not one of those teams that's going to be. Pirates are supposed to be 3-13, and they were kind of disappointing. If you look at 3-13, they were supposed to get. They're supposed to be 3-13. They only got 9-7, so they actually went -6 on their actual position. They actually were basically supposed to win the division. They didn't come close to winning the division. Versus the Panthers, they did about as well as they were supposed to. They are actually not supposed to be as good as the Pirates, in theory, but the Panthers have usually done really well. The only game they lost against was against the Lynx, and they only lost by 1. This is going to be a very... this is not going to be surprising if the Pirates don't make it to this point past this. In my prediction here is the Panthers do make it through it. I don't think the Panthers are going to lose at all. I'm going to go with it being a 3-0 sweep as well. I think there's going to be a possibility that it's going to be closer, but it's not going to be much closer. I think, honestly, the Panthers are going to absolutely demolish the Pirates. We got the Tigers and the Knights. The Tigers, who are currently the 3rd seed And the Knights and 6 seed. This would be a ridiculously good game because the Panthers and the Knights have played a total of 50 times. If this actually occurs again. It's a tough one because actually I think the Knights are actually pretty good and actually have a good chance. Not to mention the Knights are actually favored to win that. If you look at the actual Knights prediction here, Knights aren't actually that great. They've actually made the playoffs a lot of times. But to start in 2001, they've made the playoffs a ton. They've made the playoffs a ton. They've had 13 playoff appearances. They're a lot better than what we look at. Versus the Tigers. That's what we're looking for, right? Yeah. The Tigers, on the other hand, actually have done about the same amount of hits. They've done a little bit worse, but the Knights have done slightly worse when it comes to the fact that we looked at the Knights. Knights have only 90 games played. Tigers were one of those teams that started the league off. They've played a little bit more. They're a little bit better team in the context of actual offensive positions. Bad news is this is going to be a tough one. The Knights are supposed to go 8-8. They actually did better than 8-8. They did better than 8-8. They actually ended up their series with an 11-4-1. So they did a lot. They did 3 games better than they were supposed to. Versus the other side, we have the Tigers. Definitely Tigers. Tigers will go 2-14. Granted, they had one of the hardest schedules in the league. They did not go 2-14. They did almost the exact opposite. Actually, I think they actually did the exact opposite. Almost the exact opposite. They went 13-3. They had a pretty interesting schedule for the context fans. They had one of the tougher schedules, but they had the second easiest schedule in their division. So it was not a very fun thing for them. I'm happy the Tigers are making the playoffs, but honestly, it's going to be a very interesting game for this one. Looking at this one, this isn't a tough one for me. And both these teams are in a great position. Look at the divisions here. The Knights are much better in the offense. Both these teams are very good offenses, and both teams are not great defenses, or kind of like average defenses. This is tough for me. I do have to say that the Knights have a slight advantage. They haven't won as many games, but they have scored more points overall. They have just a slight edge, and this is going to be a tough one for me to say who actually is going to win this game. I'm actually going to give the Knights the victory here. But I think it's going to be a 3. I'm going to say it's 3-2. I don't think it's going to be a much closer game than that for them. I think it could go either way in this context. But it is going to be a very, very tough matchup between these two teams. And I couldn't tell you who's going to actually win this one. This game could go either way. And I think the Tigers probably will win, probably go win one, then lose one, then they'll win one, and then the Tigers, it'll be probably back-to-back games. I think it's going to be very close. Browns and the Dogs. The Browns are the 4th seed. The Dogs are the 5th seed. The Browns are favored by 22. But I have to say, look at the Browns' schedule versus the Dogs' schedule. Dogs had an 8.5 schedule, one of the hardest schedules. And they're not the hardest, but one of the hardest schedules. Dogs have beaten some pretty tough opponents. they've also lost against the Panthers twice, but who cares about that? They played, and the Dogs actually won against the Tigers earlier this season. The Browns, on the other hand, I don't think they did play them. They won that. They actually won that, and they were supposed to lose. So that's a tough one. They were supposed to be 4-13 before they get to the Dogs. Well, they went 12-3-1. They did a whole lot better than they were supposed to. Not mention if you looked at the Dogs' actual predicted ends, they've actually had only slightly over average, and they've only made the playoffs 4 times. This will be their 5th time they've made it. Versus on the other side, we have the Browns. Browns are only actually kind of slightly worse. They have a slightly worse record than their predictions. And honestly, this is going to be a very interesting matchup between these two teams. If we looked at the predictions for those teams, if we looked at the Dogs are pretty good offense, not great defense. On the other side, if you looked at the Browns, they have a not such a good defense, but they have a great defense. So this is actually going to be an absolute interesting portion for that. I think that's going to be a tough one. The difference here, I think the offense is going to be what's going to matter. And honestly, I think it's going to be the predictions for me that it's going to be a tough matchup. I am going to say the Dogs will win this one. And I'm going to say right now, I think it's going to be 3-1. I do think there's going to be a point where probably game 3, the Browns will win, but I just don't see them winning enough to be able to do it. I know they're favored, but I just can't, with good conscience, give them it. We got the Huskies and the Techs. Yeah. We got the Huskies, who are the number 1 seed, and the Techs are 8th seed. The Techs have been disappointing over the last couple weeks. Honestly, I don't think it's going to be even close. We look at the divisional matchups. The Huskies are 2nd in the scoring and not great in defense. On the other side, we have the Techs, who are great defense and terrible scoring. The problem with them playing off this games is that the Huskies go for outscoring opponents later in the game. They might not be winning early on, actually. The point out this thing, the Huskies have not been down in any games, not even any games at all, and I don't think it's going to be very fun for them. I do think there's going to be a point in these playoff games where the Huskies will be down, but I don't think they're going to be. I don't think they're going to lose any of these games. I'm picking the Huskies, and I'm going to say it's 3-0. I just think they're going to be so much better when it comes down to this. We got the Leland Cats, seed number 2, and the Supermen, who are seed 7. This is actually a pretty tough matchup between these two teams. Let's see. I think I have Supermen. Leland Cats were supposed to be 10-6. They did pretty much exactly what they were supposed to do. They did slightly better, but not enough to make much of a difference. If you look at the Leland Cats is only 2nd season they've actually been here. They actually lost the divisional round against the Lynx last season. They're 15-1. They have a 95%. They've made the playoffs every year so far. They will make it this year too. But there's a tough portion of this. If we look at the other side, when they face off against the Supermen are a pretty tough team too. Supermen have only been around for a few seasons. They've started in 2018. They've made playoffs twice out of their 4 seasons. They've made it in the last two. Actually, they made it. I think they made it last year too, but I'm not sure which one. Yeah, they made it last year. I don't know what happened to them, but they did do really well. They've done pretty well the last couple seasons. This is going to be a tough one. I think it's going to be a pretty base matchup. If you look at the Supermen's basis, or the Supermen were supposed to have an 8-8 record, pretty much average. They were not. They did not end up in it. They didn't do as well. Didn't do super well. They did actually one game better than they were supposed to. Basically, 1.5 games really. This is a tough one for me to even pick. I'm going to give the Leland Cats the victory here, but I do think it's going to be a 3-2. I do think it's going to be 3-2. I don't think it's going to be easy. I could see it going 3-1, but I think likelihood is it's going to go 3-2. Packers and the Chargers. Packers first time ever making it to the playoffs. Packers, in context, have not done well. They have not been. This is the first time they've been to the playoffs. They played 106 games. They started in 2008. Yeah. They've actually had some decent seasons. They just have not done great since 2016. I have to say this is going to be very, very tough for them. They've got a pretty tough matchup just to start off this season. The Packers won their division, which is surprising. I didn't actually expect them to win their division. Not originally, at least. Packers did win their division, though, and that's pretty impressive. Ours are supposed to go 6-10. Packers are supposed to be 1-8. Both these teams are supposed to be terrible. As it turns out, the Lynx are supposed to be 15-1. They just missed the playoffs. Warriors were supposed to be 12-5. They got demolished. And Lions did about 6-10, which is about what they're supposed to do. So they both had pretty tough schedules when it came to the facts, but I do think it's going to be a very tough matchup. To start off, they do have a interesting matchup because they have the Chargers. The Chargers are a pretty good team as well. I don't even know what to say here because the Chargers were supposed to be really bad. They actually were really good. They weren't great still, but they were better than a lot of these other teams. They ended up being 10-5. They ended up beating the Supermen, who got the next seed. They only lost to the Colts, basically, in the context of that. This is a tough one for me, and I couldn't even tell you what I think is going to happen in this game because this is going to be a very tough matchup. My current prediction is I think it is going to be the Packers that win. I think it's going to be 3-2, though. I think it's not going to be an easy game for either one of these teams. That's my prediction, is 3-2. We got the Colts and the Otters. This is a tough one for me because you have the Colts and the Otters. The Otters were supposed to be 6-10. They ended up doing a lot better than 6-10. They actually ended up being 11-5. They just got knocked off with the division, by the way, so it's kind of hard to predict them. Looking at the Colts were divisional leaders, but the Colts, in the context where it's supposed to be really bad, they end up being really good. So this is a tough one for me. If you look at the power rank at the rankings for these two teams, we got the Colts, who were actually pretty average, and you got the Otters, who were better offense than defense. I will say this is going to be a very interesting matchup. I just don't know that the Colts are going to have enough to be able to make it through this team. I'm going to give the Otters the advantage here. But I think it's going to be a very interesting game for these two teams. I'm going to give the Otters the advantage. I think it's going to be a 3-1. I think it's going to be 3-2. Now, I'm going to say 3-1. I think it's going to be a much closer game than you think. For these games are going to be all pretty close, but I do think they're going to have a better chance. Now we look at what happens if we move on to the next one. Yeah, I'm going to make my predictions for the next round as well. Not going to do as much for these because if these games do happen, the Indians will face off against the Knights, right? If this is what happens, the Indians will face off against the Knights. The Panthers will face off against the Dogs. In that case, I would probably say the Indians win that one as well, but I think they probably win it 3-2. Panthers would probably beat the Dogs 3-2 as well, so I think this is going to be pretty nice. I would say it's probably going to be the Indians and Panthers in the divisional round. I will say it's going to be tough in that round. I'm not going to go for that far, but we'll see what happens with it. Huskies face off against the Otters if that was to occur. No. Tough one. I went to the Huskies win that one 3-0 in that race. Leland Cats and Packers face off. I would say it's probably a 3-2 game as well. Both of them are going to win 3-2 off of that position. But this is going to be a very interesting matchups. These are going to be all interesting matchups. And I will point out, if a game continues onwards past 3 games, it just continues. I mean, it's one of one. Let's just say the Giants win the first game, or let's just say it goes to 3. It's 1-0. Giants favored. And then let's say it goes to Giants, and then it goes to the next 2 games go to the Indians. Then let's say the Giants win this one. Then this game decides it. If, however, let's say the Giants, it goes like this, then the Indians will clinch at that point. It just have to win 3 games. That's it for Sports Hour. The playoffs are going to be interesting this season. I can't wait to see what happens for the next week. See you guys in the next video. Don't forget to keep your game on, and I'll see you guys next week for Sports Hour. I think it's divisional round. Am I right about that? Yeah, the divisional round.